The street was as empty as a poorly kept secret when the gunshot tore through the night. Sharp, brief, final. The echo bounced off the crumbling buildings and came back to me like a summons. I sprinted down the damp alley, the smell of gunpowder mingling with rust and wet earth. My radio crackled on my shoulder, but I shut it off. There was a different silence here, almost sacred. I turned the corner with my weapon drawn, flashlight slicing through the darkness. At the center of its beam, dressed in a worn-out outfit and trembling hands, stood my childhood teacher, Mrs. Lucia, her hair tied back the same way it was when I was 8, now streaked with rain and fear. In her right hand, the revolver. On the ground, a man collapsed, blood trailing slowly toward the drain. She looked at me as if I were still the boy in the last row, the one she defended when the world grew too heavy. "Son," she whispered, and the word cut straight through me. "There's no way to explain." I took 2 steps forward, my heart pounding in my throat. "Drop the weapon, teacher." She raised the barrel, not at me but at her own chest, and with tears welling in her eyes, she said, "If I let go, someone dies." I was born and raised in the suburbs of São Paulo, on a street where every gate had its own story of survival. My father was a bus fare collector, a stern, quiet man, carrying a weariness in his eyes that never seemed to fade. My mother was a seamstress, always trying to balance the harshness of life with small gestures of care. Hot coffee before school, a shirt carefully ironed. I grew up surrounded by the noise of neighbors, the distant gunshots that sometimes cut through the night, and the sirens of patrol cars that reminded us the city never slept. From an early age, I learned to distinguish the difference between fireworks and gunfire, like someone who learns to tell scents apart in a kitchen. It was in this environment that my worldview was shaped. There was no straight line between right and wrong, only a road full of curves and shadows where every choice carried a heavy price. As a boy, I had teachers who were lighthouses amid the darkness of that neighborhood. Mrs. Lucia, especially, was one of them. She taught me that reading wasn't just about putting letters together, but about breaking through invisible walls. She told me I had more than brute strength, that my mind could be both weapon and shield, while many of my classmates got lost to crime, drugs, or became just. Another cold statistic: I followed the path of the navy blue uniform, believing I could make a difference where everything seemed lost. But the uniform isn't a hero's cape, it's heavy armor. The first time I put it on, I felt pride, but also the invisible weight pulling down on my shoulders. The responsibility of holding life and death in split-second decisions. In the force, I quickly learned it wasn't enough to follow rules. You had to hear the silence, read a look, feel the energy of a place before stepping in. The streets teach you to grow eyes in the back of your head, not to trust what seems obvious. But at the same time, with each incident, I realized the hardness needed to survive came at a price. I slept poorly, dreamed of faces I couldn't save, carried invisible scars even my mother couldn't stitch together. My sense of justice transformed. I stopped believing in happy endings and fought only for possible ones. Even so, I tried to preserve something human inside me, a thread of empathy that kept me from becoming just another cold piece of the machine. Maybe it was a remnant of my childhood, of Mrs. Lucia's words telling me I could be better. That conflict lives in me every day. The officer who must act fast and firm, and the boy who learned that every life has value. It's a tightrope walk, and sometimes I feel like I'm about to fall, but I keep going, because I don't know how to live any other way. That night, when I saw her with the gun in her hands, my entire journey exploded inside me. It wasn't just another call, just another suspect, or another body on the ground. It was as if my past had come back, cruel and unexpected, to test everything I believed in. The woman who once showed me there was a way out of crime was now at the center of a scene that could destroy what little faith I still had left in humanity. And there I was, uniformed, armed, torn in two, forced to decide not as a student, not as a son, not as a man, but as a police officer, standing on the razor's edge between the law and my heart. It was a little after 2 in the morning when the radio crackled, breaking through the heavy silence of the sleeping city. I was parked on a narrow street, mentally reviewing the night shift, when the dispatcher's voice came through, loaded with urgency. Available unit, report of gunshot, east side, Jardim das Oliveiras neighborhood near the central square. Locals report a single shot followed by silence. That neighborhood, though, marked by humble houses and old corner shops, always carried the reputation of hiding secrets behind closed curtains. It was a place where fear silenced more than any scream. The kind of call that never comes with enough details, but always promises more than a simple report by dawn. As I flipped on the lights, the city seemed to rearrange itself before me. The streets took on a different aura, every shadow carrying the suggestion of hidden eyes. The engine echoed on the wet asphalt, and each empty intersection reminded me that the night has its own code. No willing witnesses, no brave neighbors, just shut windows and hearts pounding behind walls. Adrenaline began to pulse, that mixture of instinct and training that pushes you forward even when reason whispers for you to stop. On the way there, flashes of my career came back like ghosts. I remembered how many times a simple gunshot heard had turned into irreversible tragedy. Bodies stretched across the pavement, lives cut short. I also remembered when it was a false alarm, just a car backfiring or someone testing their courage in the middle of the night. But this night carried a different weight, though I couldn't explain why. The silence between blocks seemed to whisper that something personal was about to reach me. When dispatch repeated the exact location, I gripped the wheel tighter. It was near the municipal school where I once studied, the very place that shaped part of who I am. Calls rarely came from that area. Though humble, it was usually calm. But at that moment, destiny seemed to be mocking me. A shiver ran down my neck, as if my whole childhood had risen from bed to ride in the patrol car with me. As I neared the scene, I cut the siren, leaving only the pulsing glow of the lights reflecting off the worn facades. My heart beat faster, not from immediate danger, but from the strange sensation of being pulled into a memory. The alley indicated was narrow, barely lit, the kind of place where time seems frozen. That's when I heard hurried footsteps, and then the oppressive silence that always comes before something bigger. I stepped out of the car with my weapon drawn, flashlight ready, and took a deep breath. The call was no longer just another midnight routine. There was no crowd, no backup sirens, no curious neighbors peeking out. There was only me, the darkness, and an echo that seemed to call my name. Each step I took toward that place reminded me that life as a cop is built on unpredictable crossroads, and that night, more than ever, the radio hadn't just led me to a crime scene. It was guiding me straight into a collision with my own past, a clash between the man I became and the boy who still carried the lessons of someone who once believed in me. The alley opened up before me like a dark tunnel, damp walls breathing mold, old lampposts casting shadows that stretched across the ground like silent specters. My heart was pounding faster than my footsteps, but my hand stayed firm on the gun, finger resting close to the trigger, ready to react at the slightest movement. A light drizzle fell onto the still warm hood of the patrol car and trickled down to the asphalt, forming little streams that reflected the red and blue flashes of the lights. When I shut them off, I sank into a silence so thick it seemed to swallow even the sound of my own breath. Then I caught it. The smell, fresh gunpowder. That metallic scent that clings to your throat and leaves no doubt. This wasn't a false alarm, not an exhaust pipe backfiring. Someone had fired a weapon, and the night was still holding its secret close. The chill deepened, but sweat slid down the back of my neck, not from the weather, but from the instinct screaming inside me. Something was terribly wrong. I swept the flashlight beam through the alley. The light cut through the darkness, revealing details that under any other circumstance would have gone unnoticed. A broken toy abandoned in a corner, as if a child had left it behind and never returned. Sneaker prints pressed into the damp mud, and further ahead, a motionless figure on the ground. For an instant, the world narrowed. Each step toward that body felt like dragging lead weights, as if my boots were sinking into quicksand. Up close, the truth unfolded. A man sprawled on the ground, blood spilling toward the gutter in a crimson thread glistening under the yellow glow of the lamppost. His face partly hidden in shadow, his mouth ajar as if trying to release a final word. The impact of the scene hit me instantly, but it wasn't what froze me in place. It wasn't the victim, or the blood, or even the suffocating silence. It was the figure standing a few meters ahead that turned that night into a living nightmare. It was her, Mrs. Lucia, my childhood teacher, the woman who once believed in me when no one else did. The same who wrote on chalkboards with steady hands, telling our class that reading was a way to escape any prison. And now standing in front of me, she looked different. Disheveled hair, ragged breathing, eyes wide between fear and resolve. And in her right hand, gleaming under my flashlight, a revolver. For a moment, time stopped. The alley felt suspended in another dimension, as if only the two of us existed in that universe. The beam of my flashlight bounced off the metal of her gun and shot straight back into my eyes, blinding me for an instant, while memories of that classroom crashed uninvited into my mind. The smell of chalk, the sound of pages turning, her calm voice urging me not to give up. I stepped forward carefully, every muscle in my body demanding caution, but every memory begging me to believe this couldn't be real. The radio crackled on my shoulder, requesting updates, requesting procedure, but I ignored it. The scene in front of me didn't fit any protocol. Her presence there defied logic. Deep down, I already knew this wasn't going to be like any other case. My first impression was brutal and undeniable. I hadn't just arrived at a crime scene. I had stepped into a rupture point of my own story. The alley, the body, the weapon, and my old teacher, all of it colliding into a cruel revelation. I wasn't just facing the law that night. I was standing before a living fragment of my past, armed, blood-stained, and about to decide the course of my future. I swallowed hard and moved a few steps closer, each one echoing as if the alley were a chamber, amplifying my fear. The flashlight trembled slightly in my left hand, not from lack of control, but from the weight of what I was seeing. Mrs. Lucia wasn't just an armed suspect, she was a ghost from my past, standing before me in flesh and blood, now transformed into a living threat. The body on the ground still bled, the dark liquid snaking its way toward the gutter. The silence wasn't just absence of sound, it was pressure, a suffocating presence, a scream trapped in the damp walls around us. "Drop the gun, teacher." My voice came out firm, but cracked with tension I couldn't hide. Her eyes locked onto mine, and inside them I saw years of history. The boy without books at home, finding hope in school notebooks. The teenager ready to give up, saved by her reminder that quitting didn't fit me. Those same eyes that once radiated encouragement now showed fear, despair, and a flicker of defiance. She lifted her hand slightly, not at me, but in the air, as if balancing something invisible. "Don't come closer. Don't. You get it? If I let go, someone dies." Her voice was a fractured whisper, yet it carried a certainty that shook me. Every second tightened the rope between us, every tiny movement threatened to snap it. My training screamed at me, "Keep distance, call backup, neutralize the threat." But my heart shouted back. This was the woman who once defended me against a world that laughed in my face. How could I see her as just another criminal? Then I heard it. Hurried footsteps at the far end of the alley. My instincts spun. Flashlight snapping toward the noise, gun raised. Shadows moved and then vanished, leaving only the dreadful certainty that we weren't alone. That changed everything. This wasn't just dangerous, it was unpredictable. There could be an accomplice, a witness, or another threat waiting in the dark. The radio crackled again. "Unit 23? Status report?" My hand hovered over the button, but I froze. How could I possibly explain that the armed suspect in front of me was the woman who had taught me to write my name, who had saved me from the pull of the streets? How could I reduce this to codes and jargon? I took a breath and left the radio silent, isolating myself further. Each step closer made the alley feel tighter. I could hear the drizzle dripping from gutters, the distant hum of an engine on the avenue. But above all, I heard the dry click of her gun as she adjusted her grip. That sound boomed louder than any shot. It was warning. It was a border. And then I noticed something that froze me even more. The man on the ground twitched. His fingers moved weakly. He wasn't dead. He was fighting for every breath, choking on his own blood. That changed everything. Now I was racing against time. I did the only thing I knew. I tried to reach her not as a suspect, but as the teacher she once was. I don't know what's happening here, but we can fix this without more blood. You always told me every problem has a way out. Show me now. Show me the way out. Her hand shook, tears shimmering in her eyes. I could see a war raging inside her, as fierce as the one tearing me apart. But the danger was at its peak. Her gun could fire any second. At me, at herself, or at the man on the ground still clinging to life. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just a police call. It was a duel between past and present, between law and memory. The action had reached its breaking point, and I had to decide fast. Because in the dead of night, hesitation is the one thing that kills. Her breathing came in short, broken gasps, as if life itself was slipping through her fingers along with the gun. The body on the ground, which until then had seemed like just another midnight casualty, let out a faint groan, almost a strangled plea for help through the blood. My flashlight trembled as its beam slid across his face, and in that instant, the ground beneath me vanished. I knew that man, not from rumors, not from old files. I knew him personally. Ricardo, former cop, former partner. We had served in the same battalion years ago, until he was expelled for getting mixed up with vigilante groups who delivered justice outside the law. The last I'd heard, he was knee-deep in extortion schemes, terrorizing shopkeepers with threats disguised as protection. Seeing his face there, drenched in blood, clinging to life, was a blow that shattered any notion of coincidence. My pulse hammered in my ears. Memories raced back, his mocking laugh in the break room, the arguments about right and wrong on the streets, the whispers that confirmed what I never wanted to believe, that he had crossed the line. And now he was here, in the alley of my childhood, lying at the feet of my old teacher, her hand wrapped around a smoking gun. This wasn't random. There was a connection, and I had to understand it before it was too late. "You know him, don't you?" I asked, voice low, heavy, trying to cut through the wall of silence she had built. She bit her lip, eyes darting between me and the bleeding man, until she whispered, "He wouldn't stop. He came after me every night." The confession hit me like a hidden explosion. Every word was a shard driving into my chest. Suddenly, the pieces shifted. Ricardo was notorious for shaking down families, for terrorizing anyone who resisted. And what if Mrs. Lucia had become one of his targets? What if that shot wasn't a crime, but desperation? My mind twisted with the conflict. The scene before my eyes screamed culpable, but my heart whispered something else. I edged closer, weighing reason against instinct. That's when I noticed something nearly overlooked. Another gun, lying partly under Ricardo's arm. Not hers. A heavier, restricted-use pistol. My stomach tightened. If that gun was his, it meant he hadn't come unarmed. Maybe he fired first. Maybe he had come there to silence her once and for all. I angled the light and saw the spent shell casing near his body, not far from where the weapon had fallen. The blood trail told. Part of the story. He advanced, she reacted, the shot rang out. But the streets never give the whole truth. They give fragments, and we're left to piece them together, even when they don't fit. Shock paralyzed me, but not just because of the evidence. The man bleeding out wasn't just a criminal. He was someone who had once worn the same badge, who had patrolled at my side. And the woman trembling before me wasn't just an armed suspect. She was the teacher who once gave me my first lesson in courage. Both of them bound together by a single gunshot in the dead of night. The truth was unraveling in cruel layers. There were no strangers in that alley, no anonymous victim, no faceless suspect, only ghosts from my past colliding violently at my feet. I realized then this case wasn't chance. It was a reckoning. one that dragged me to the very center of it, forcing me to face loyalty, moral debt, and the razor-thin line between justice and vengeance. The real shock wasn't just discovering who the victim and shooter were. It was knowing that this scene was no accident. It was the night the past came calling, and the line between my duty and my humanity blurred into something I might never be able to untangle. My chest felt like a silent battlefield. On one side was the uniform I wore, the oath I had sworn under the flag, the duty to act within the law. On the other, the living memory of the woman who once believed in me when the world tried to push me aside. My hand held the gun, steady, but inside I trembled like a boy lost in his own shadow. The radio kept crackling on my shoulder, demanding reports, demanding answers, but I couldn't bring myself to press the button. How could I reduce this scene into sterile police jargon? How could I call my former teacher an armed suspect, and the man bleeding on the ground a victim of gunfire? The conflict wasn't just professional, it was existential. I knew exactly what the manual demanded: restrain, isolate, call for backup, preserve the scene. But every time I looked into her eyes, the classroom came flooding back. I could smell the chalk, hear the rustle of notebooks, feel her patience as she guided my clumsy handwriting. She was the one who told me I could be more than statistics, more than the fate the streets had written for me. And now those same eyes weren't filled with encouragement, but with terror, shame, and the plea for trust. Yet Ricardo wasn't just another man on the ground. He had once been a brother in arms. I remembered the heat of long patrols, the silence shared in exhaustion, the laughter in rare moments of relief. Yes, he had crossed the line. Yes, he had chosen the shadows. But part of me still couldn't accept watching him bleed out in the gutter, written off as just another casualty. The dilemma twisted inside me. If I protected her, I would betray my oath. If I chose the law blindly, I would betray my own humanity. Either way, I would be scarred forever. Two voices fought in my head. One was the hardened officer, cold and decisive, telling me to act without hesitation, to treat her like any other threat. The other was the boy I once was, still alive somewhere deep down, clinging to the memory of her hands guiding mine across a page, teaching me that every life has worth. I was split in two, like the uniform itself was a heavy mask hiding a heart that refused to turn to stone. And time was slipping away. Ricardo's breathing grew fainter by the second. Each gasp was a reminder that his life was draining fast. But every tremor in her hand, every tear in her eye was proof she could end hers at any moment. It was as if I stood in the middle of an invisible crossfire, not of bullets, but of choices. I realized then that the real enemy wasn't in front of me. It was inside me. It was the war between what I must be and what I wanted to be, between duty and gratitude, between the law written on paper and the justice written on the heart. My eyes burned, though I hadn't noticed the tears welling up. It wasn't death I feared. It was the choice itself, because in that alley, under the weight of silence, I understood something brutal. Whatever I decided, a part of me would have to die too. And by sunrise, no matter what report was written, I would never be the same again. The alley seemed to shrink around me, its walls pressing closer, forcing the weight of a decision I could no longer postpone. Sweat ran down my face, mixing with the drizzle, and my breath came heavy, drowned out only by the distant barking of a dog and the wet, rattling groans of the man bleeding at my feet. Ricardo clung to life with barely a thread, his mouth opening and closing. No words, only the gurgle of blood. And across from me stood Mrs. Lucia, the woman who once held my childhood in her hands, now holding a gun to her own chest as if she wanted to end everything right there. And I was caught in the middle, bound to choose between duty and memory, law and loyalty. I took a deep breath. My head was a storm of voices, but at the core there were only two: the cop trained to act without hesitation, and the boy who had once found salvation in her words. I couldn't stall anymore. One false move and she could pull the trigger on herself. 1 second too long and Ricardo would lose his fight for life. This wasn't about saving just one. It was about deciding which part of me would survive after this night. I raised my weapon and leveled it at her, my voice cutting through the tension. "Drop the gun now, teacher. Nothing gets solved this way." My throat burned, not with anger, but with desperation. Inside, I begged for her to see me as she once did, not just the officer in front of her, but the boy she taught to believe in himself. Her hand shook, a single tear streaking down her face, and I saw the barrel waver between her chest and the ground. I stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and lowered my tone, speaking almost like a plea. "I am still the boy you believed in. I'm here because you taught me never to quit. Don't quit now. Drop the gun and let me handle this." The world held its breath. Seconds stretched like hours, her finger hovering on the trigger. Then at last, her grip loosened. The weapon slipped from her hand and clattered onto the pavement, the metallic crash echoing through the alley like thunder. I surged forward, kneeling beside Ricardo, pressing my hands against his wound. Warm blood soaked through my fingers instantly, his breathing, ragged, faint, but still there. I knew I might be too late, but I couldn't let him die without trying. At the same time, I kept her in the corner of my vision. She had sunk to her knees, sobbing, repeating over and over, "He was going to kill me. He was going to kill me." The weight of my choice settled in. I hadn't chosen between them. I'd chosen life, both of theirs, in whatever form it could still be saved. I grabbed the radio, breaking the silence I had resisted until then. Unit 23. "Requesting immediate medical support. One male down, critical condition, female suspect secured." The words came out strong, but inside I knew I had crossed an invisible line. I had shielded her, given her the chance to speak her truth. I had fought to save a man who had betrayed everything we once swore to uphold. That was my decision, not to kill, not to condemn, not to abandon, but to believe, one last time, in the possibility of a way out. And as the wail of approaching sirens began to grow, louder, bouncing off the walls of the alley, I realized something had been sealed in that moment. I wasn't just another cop following protocol anymore. I was a man who had chosen to carry on my own shoulders the full weight of humanity and its contradictions. With blood on my hands and my teacher weeping in the shadows, I understood. The cost of that decision wouldn't just be written in reports or hearings. It would live in me for the rest of my life. The metallic snap of the handcuffs still echoed in the alley when reinforcements spread out to follow procedure. I stayed close to Mrs. Lucia, trying to keep the posture of a cop, though inside I was just a man crushed by the weight of what had just unfolded. The ambulance had rushed Ricardo away in critical condition, and all that remained was the hollow rhythm of silence, broken only by the click of cameras as forensics documented the scene. The medics had worked quickly, diving onto his body as if each second could be stretched into hope. Tubes, compressions, monitors, all fighting against the inevitable. I'd pressed my own hands onto his wound until they burned, but later, the radio brought the news I dreaded. He hadn't made it. His life slipped away between the alley and the hospital doors. Another number for the midnight statistics, but for me, it was far more. Meanwhile, another officer crouched beside Mrs. Lucia, moving to cuff her wrists. She didn't resist. She simply lowered her head and let the steel close around her, skin murmuring like a broken record. "He was going to kill me. He was going to kill me." To some of the others, she was just a suspect. But I saw the woman who once pushed me toward the light, now shackled by the shadows she had been forced into. The scene unfolded with cold efficiency, yellow markers placed by the blood, shell casings bagged, weapons collected, reports barked into radios, codes repeated. Each piece of evidence reduced the tragedy to numbers and categories. And yet, among my colleagues, I could hear the whispers, some calling it just another case, others muttering that I'd blurred the line, gotten too involved. Their eyes judged me quietly, as if my silence was already a confession. Then came the questions. The sergeant stepped close, his face carved with suspicion and curiosity. What happened? Who fired first? His words demanded clarity, but my truth was tangled in contradictions. I recited what the evidence suggested. 2 guns, 1 shot, 1 woman defending herself. But my voice betrayed me. I could feel it. Every syllable weighed down with a past I couldn't scrub from the facts. By then, neighbors had begun to appear. Timid faces pressed to windows, cell phones glowing faintly in the dark. Some filmed, some whispered, and I knew, by morning, this wouldn't be just a report. It would be a story, a headline, and my name could be dragged through it, twisted, misunderstood. The official consequences began immediately. I signed forms with trembling fingers, words locking me into an investigation I couldn't escape. The internal affairs process would open, procedures would be scrutinized, and my choices dissected. I felt the cold shadow of the department's discipline pressing against me, a reminder that even the right decision carried punishment when it strayed from the manual. But the hardest consequences weren't on paper. They were human. I imagined my mother hearing the news, trying to understand why her son had chosen to protect a woman, holding a gun. I thought of the colleagues who now eyed me differently, some with sympathy, others with quiet disdain. The walls of the force had always been heavy, but that night they began to close in on me. When the last ambulance pulled away and the alley emptied, I stood there, drenched, exhausted, staring at the place where blood still glistened under the weak streetlight. Officially, the case was sealed for the night, but inside me the fallout was just beginning, because the immediate consequences weren't only procedural or professional, they were personal. They etched themselves into me with the certainty that whatever I chose that night, whatever I did or didn't do, would haunt me far longer than any report or disciplinary hearing ever could. The metallic sound of the cuffs still hung in the damp air when the alley emptied bit by bit. Forensics wrapped up their work, neighbors whispered behind curtains, and officers filed their reports. I stayed near Mrs. Lucia, watching her sit in the back seat of the patrol car, hands cuffed, eyes swollen from crying. She looked nothing like the suspect written in the paperwork. She looked like the same woman who once shielded me from the weight of the world with nothing more than chalk and patience. Then she looked at me, not the way a detainee looks at the officer in charge, but the way a teacher looks at a student she still believes in. Her voice cracked when it finally broke the silence. "You don't understand. He came every night, knocking on my door, threatening me. He said if I told anyone, they'd find me in an empty lot." Her words landed in me like a punch. I knew Ricardo's reputation. I had seen the marks of his power in other streets, other families. But hearing it from her lips was different. It wasn't rumor. It was survival spoken out loud. I bent closer, lowering the mask of duty for a moment, and asked, "Why didn't you come to us? Why didn't you ask for official protection?" She gave a bitter, broken laugh. "And trust who? After watching so many boys I taught fall into the hands of cops who turned into criminals with badges? After watching even you nearly swallowed by this system? I didn't believe anyone would listen without turning away." Silence pressed between us, because she was right. I knew how the system treated women under threat. Cases dismissed, reports buried, pleas turned into statistics. She wasn't just confessing fear. She was exposing a truth about the institution I swore to defend. Then she said the words that shifted everything. She lifted her swollen eyes to mine, piercing through the uniform, the gun, the armor, and whispered, "If you're still here today, alive, it's because I believed in you once. Now it's your turn to believe in me. I didn't shoot to kill, I shot to survive." Those words split me open. It wasn't just a plea, it was a mirror of our past. Once, she had saved me from becoming another casualty of the streets. Now she was asking me to save her with my faith, my silence, my choice. For a few seconds, the alley disappeared. There were no radios, no reports, no colleagues watching. Just me and her, bound by an old pact that had resurfaced in the ugliest of nights. And in that moment I understood. The official channels would never hold the whole truth. The system would reduce her to a headline, erase the nuance, ignore the survival. When the others approached, I forced my voice to sound neutral, almost cold. Suspect claims self-defense. It was clinical, procedural, but inside, I carried something far greater. The decision that her voice would not be buried in silence. That conversation was what changed everything, because it wasn't about choosing between the law and my emotions. It was about recognizing that truth doesn't always fit into reports. And from that night on, I knew I couldn't just be another cop. I had to be the man who listened, who believed, even when the system didn't. Standing there between the woman who once saved me and the ghost of a partner I'd lost, I realized this wasn't just another case. It was the night that reshaped the way I saw the badge, the law, and myself. That night, after hours of reports, statements, and the endless weight of watchful eyes, I finally returned home. I sat at the edge of my bed, still in uniform, the fabric drenched with sweat and rain. I couldn't take off my boots, couldn't shut off the radio, couldn't even close my eyes. The scene replayed in my mind like a broken reel. Ricardo bleeding out, Mrs. Lucia with the gun trembling in her hands, her plea for me to believe her. It was all there, looped endlessly. I wasn't whole anymore. I was torn into pieces. I stared at the ceiling, trapped in the silence of my own thoughts. The badge, which had once given me pride, now felt unbearably heavy. For the first time, I questioned whether I was anything more than a cog in a machine that grinds lives into dust. That night, I realized I wasn't just stuck between choices. I was trapped between worlds. One world was the law, written in ink, rigid and absolute. The other was reality, jagged, human, full of pain and cracks the manuals never account for. Seeing Mrs. Lucia in that alley made it impossible to ignore. She had been the one to push me beyond the weight of the streets, and now she was proof that the system fails. How many women live in silence, cornered until the only option left is to pull a trigger? How many men like Ricardo, once sworn to the same duty as me, lose themselves to the shadows? The questions piled up, and each one pressed harder against my chest. But from that storm came a shift inside me. I realized it wasn't enough to be just another officer following orders. I had to be a bridge between the coldness of the law and the warmth of the human stories hiding beneath every case file. Her words haunted me. I didn't shoot to kill, I shot to survive. That wasn't just a defense. It was a mirror of the country we lived in, where survival itself is an act of resistance. I looked down at my hands, still marked with the dried stains of Ricardo's blood, and thought of everything those hands had held: guns, cuffs, pens, scratching reports. But how often had they truly held a life? How often had they truly listened? The thought cut deep. I couldn't just keep existing as a protocol machine. I had to honor the very lesson she once gave me, that every life had value. This realization wasn't some glorious revelation. It came like a scar, raw and permanent. I knew the system would scrutinize me, maybe punish me. My name might carry suspicion. My career might never recover fully. But I also knew that losing my humanity would be the greater defeat. From that night on, I decided I would carry both the uniform and her memory. I wouldn't treat calls as statistics, but as lives, messy and imperfect, each demanding more than codes and procedures. That was my transformation, to stop being just a cop and start being someone who sees people first. Change isn't about abandoning who you are. It's about shedding what no longer serves you. That alley taught me my greatest duty isn't just to enforce the law, but to protect life in all its contradictions. True justice isn't blind. It sees, it feels, it understands the wounds beneath the surface. And that's who I became. Still a cop, but with open eyes. Still wearing the badge, but guided by the heart. Because if I ever let go of that, if I stop believing in people, then I erase the very flame that Mrs. Lucia once lit inside me. And that flame, I swore to myself, will never die. Dawn was already breaking when the case finally began to fold into the cold machinery of procedure. The alley, which only hours earlier had been a stage of chaos, was now just another location marked with numbered evidence tags and bloodstains documented for reports. Forensics finished their last photographs, sealed the shell casings, and carried away the fragments of the night as if boxing up a nightmare. Ricardo had been rushed to the hospital, but the radio confirmed what I already suspected. He hadn't survived. Another death for the city's statistics. For me, though, it was much more. It was the end of a man who had once shared a patrol car with me, laughter in the break room, and sweat on long shifts under the sun. Mrs. Lucia sat in the back of a patrol car, her hands cuffed, her body trembling. There were no outbursts, no screams, only the silence of someone who knew life would never return to what it had been. Her eyes, swollen and red, found mine through the glass. For a moment, I saw not a suspect, but the teacher who had once kept me from the abyss with nothing more than her words. That contradiction gnawed at me more than the steel on her wrists. At headquarters, the process rolled out with clinical precision. Scene secured, suspect detained, victim transported, firearms seized. The report read like an instruction manual, stripping away everything human that had pulsed through that night. I dictated. I signed. I handed over evidence. Each line I wrote was another layer of distance between the paperwork and the truth I had lived. My hands moved like they belonged to someone else, because if I stopped to feel, the weight would crush me. Colleagues muttered in corners. Some said I had gotten too close, let sentiment cloud judgment. Others whispered that they understood, that in my place they might have chosen the same. But all of them looked at me differently now, as if I had crossed some invisible threshold. For them, this was another case in the books. For me, it was a scar carved into my soul. By sunrise, I accompanied her transfer to the precinct. The city stirred awake. Kids in uniforms rushing to school, buses filling with workers. Life moved on, indifferent to the blood that had been spilled just streets away. In the back seat, Mrs. Lucia looked at me through the rearview mirror. She didn't speak, but her gaze carried both fear and a plea that I wouldn't let her voice be swallowed by the system. I looked away, not because I wanted to, but because I knew I couldn't promise what she needed. The case was officially recorded as homicide under investigation. The ballistic analysis confirmed Ricardo's gun had been fired, supporting her claim of self-defense. That detail could change everything in court. Still, until the system decided, she would remain under custody, and my name would remain tied to the incident, every step of mine dissected by internal affairs. When I finally returned home, I pulled off my boots and sank into the bed without even changing. Outside, the city carried on. Inside, I knew nothing in me would ever return to normal. On paper, the conclusion was simple. One dead, one arrested, one officer involved. But in my memory, the case would never be closed. The alley was no longer just a piece of the city. It had become the place where duty collided with humanity, where I learned the cruel truth that reports can close a case, but they can never close the wounds it leaves behind. Months have passed since that night, and still I wake sometimes to the echo of that gunshot ringing in my head. It isn't just the dry crack of the bullet that haunts me, it's everything bound to it. The desperate look in Mrs. Lucia's eyes, Ricardo collapsing in the gutter, and the crushing sense that fate had chosen that alley to force me into the hardest crossroads of my life. For most, the case is already buried, filed away in the, endless machinery of the system. But for me, it still breathes, like a scar that refuses to close. Mrs. Lucia awaited trial out of custody, after the forensic report confirmed Ricardo's gun had been fired and the prosecutor accepted her plea of self-defense. Still, the weight on her life remains. Months later, I went to see her, not in uniform, just as the boy who once sat in the back row of her classroom. She received me with weary eyes, yet that same faint glow of faith in people still lingered. We didn't speak much about the case, but at one moment she took my hand and said, "That night, I only managed to survive because I remembered what I once taught you. Never give up, even when everything seems lost." Her words sank into me like stone, because in truth, she had saved me again. Not with chalk this time, but with her will to resist. Ricardo's shadow lingers differently. I can't think of him solely as the corrupted man who crossed the line. I also remember the partner who once laughed with me during long patrols, who shared exhaustion and silence, who believed even briefly that we could make a difference. His death doesn't fill me with rage. It fills me with grief. Because in him, I see what I could have become had I not had someone who believed in me at the right time. The lesson from that night doesn't live in reports or in court files. It lives in my chest. I learned that the law is necessary, but never enough. That procedures can save lives, but they can also suffocate the truths that don't fit their molds. I learned that every call, every case, is not just paperwork. It's a story of life and death, fear and courage, mistakes and redemption. And most of all, I learned that empathy isn't weakness. It's the only thing that keeps us human when everything else tries to turn us into machines. Now I walk the streets with the same uniform, but a different gaze. I no longer see just suspects and victims. I see whole people, carrying invisible histories. That night taught me that behind every gun, every scream, every pair of handcuffs, there is a life that deserves to be heard before it is judged. When I pass by the old school, I remember the boy I once was in the last row, listening to her voice telling me I could be more than statistics. And now I know that being more doesn't mean being perfect. It means being human enough not to look away from another's pain. That is the legacy of that night. The certainty that we can't change the whole world, but we can change someone's fate when we choose to listen, when we choose to believe. She once did that for me. That night, I tried to do the same for her. And so, even with the scars and the ghosts, I keep putting on the uniform every day. Because in the end, this job isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about protecting life, even when life is contradictory, painful, and imperfect. If you've made it this far, if this story touched you in any way, I ask you, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me which part struck you the most. Your voice, just like Mrs. Lucia's on that night, can make all the difference.